introduce Augie Grant, our longtime morning speaker about the state of the communications technology.
Thanks, Larry. It's such a pleasure to be taking the next step. I have this long-time relationship with Technology Futures going back to 1992 when I was an assistant professor here at the University of Texas, and one of the students in my class was working for TFI, and I had an idea. The field needed a compilation of everything that was going on in technology so we could use it as a textbook. And there wasn't anything like that out there. So I said, I could have students in my class do chapters. And I talked Larry, he still remembers the lunch. I actually don't remember the lunch. I just remember the cover of the book. We talked him into publishing it, and that was first edition was 92, and we did it annually at that point, and then went to every 2 years once we had the internet to do updates. Point is, we've been trying to keep up with what's going on, and a lot of context is going to come out of today's presentation that I think will inform a lot of what you learned yesterday and a lot of the information that was presented. I'm going to assume that 2020 is going to be the year of the network. Now, when I say year of the network, you're probably presuming I'm talking about 5G. And indeed, it might be 5G, probably not. And I had a whole set of slides on 5G, and when I saw the presentations yesterday, I said, you know what? You know everything about 5G, so we'll come back to it a little at the end. But what's important about the network, from my perspective, is not the technology used in the network, although we can address that at the end if you'd like. But it's what is the content on the network? Oh, I did have one slide I kept on 5G. Keep in mind, we're talking about 5G. We got 3 dimensions. We have the network itself. So we want to understand how the network works, the difference in both capacity and reach of the different bands. The users are more important, but I want to put your attention on the third point, which is marketing. For the next year, even though there's a massive amount of research and experimentation and testing going on, this is a marketing tool. And that's not a bad thing. Anytime we can get consumers to say, ooh, there's something new and shiny, I will buy that. Car makers used to do that with their planned obsolescence. People would buy a new vehicle every 3 years because that's about as long as the cars lasted in the 1960s and 1970s. We had that with phones for a while, where the carriers were subsidizing the phones through higher rates, and every 2 years we could get a new phone. So now that we're all buying our own phones in today's economic model, we have to give people a reason. Whether it's actually a tangible reason and people are getting something they want or need, or it's just making them feel good, making them feel like they've got the latest. There's a lot of that that's going on. So keep in mind that the marketing dimension, I'm not bringing it up to minimize it, I'm bringing it up to say it is significant, and it is what helps give us the critical mass of hardware in the field so that we can do other things with it. And the other things are what's really important. We've got to realize that the biggest innovation in the networks is they're ubiquitous. Anytime, anywhere. I mean, the thought that you could walk into this room and not be able to check your email and find out what's going on, or not be able to get a text, it's almost unthinkable. Are we Facebooking live this morning? Okay, so that's another implication of the network and what we're doing. Everything we say going out to all those wonderful people that Mark Zuckerberg has, no, I shouldn't say that. I'm one of the few people in the room not on Facebook for a lot of reasons. Point is, we as consumers want to be able to get any information we want. We want to do any shopping we want. We want to be entertained anywhere we go, anytime we're there. So, now, having said that, let's start to look at specific technologies and what's going on. The first thing he comes across is the connections between the technologies. I'm putting 5G at the center this year because there's a lot of attention. But there's a lot of other things going on, and we'll page through these one thing at a time. Let's start with television. A lot of big developments in TV that are going to affect what's going on in the networks and perhaps lessen the need for 5G. First of these is ATSC 3.0. This is a new broadcast standard that's completely incompatible with the existing ATSC standard that was developed for high definition TV. That's important because in 1952, when color TV was proposed, the Federal Communications Commission gave us a system called NTSC, for the National Television Standards Committee, that was one of the most technologically complex and much more expensive way of delivering color, so they could protect the 500,000 or so TVs that had already been produced. As a result, more than 1 billion TVs made over the next 4 decades all had inferior technology to protect those early TVs. So when the high definition television standard was proposed first in the mid-90s and finally became a reality in the early 2000s, they said, well, we want to make it compatible, but we want to do it a completely different way. So it's kind of compatible, kind of not. Well, with ATSC 3.0, the newest version, it's completely incompatible. But a lot of people don't realize it's kind of been that way. I like coming back to Austin so I can look at the TV stations. There's Channel 7, KTBC. This is the station that Lady Bird Johnson started. She, one of the pioneers of Texas broadcasting. Except it's not on Channel 7. It moved off Channel 7 to another channel when they had to go digital. And they kept their analog signal on Channel 7 until they were forced to turn it off in 2009. Oh, and now we're in the middle of something called a spectrum repack, where because the TV stations are transmitting digitally, we don't need this great big space in between stations to protect from interference. So they can put a lot more stations together. That's freeing up bandwidth that's going to be used for other purposes. And there are 2 big categories. The first is telephony, and the second is unlicensed spectrum. And we need both. There have to be some spectrum that you don't have allocated so we can use it for things like Wi-Fi. And we also don't want to have accidents where people are assuming spectrum isn't used, but it really is allocated, like we had in Dallas in the early 2000s, when the KXAS first put its digital TV signal on the air. It shut down the heart monitors at one of the hospitals in Dallas because they had been using the same frequency, and they had someone in engineering had just assumed, well, this frequency isn't in use, we use this for heart monitors. And when they started broadcasting digitally, it shut it down. So anyway, we need unlicensed spectrum. We need licensed spectrum. So the TV repack is going to free up. Consumers aren't seeing any of this. I still come to Austin and I'll watch KITV, Channel 42. Except it's not on Channel 42, it's probably on Channel 13 or Channel 6 or something. But we don't care. All of that happens behind the scenes. What's important is that spectrum map we saw yesterday, the amount taken up by TV is shrinking to free up spectrum. At the same time, the FCC has had the Advanced Television Standards Committee create in the new standard the ability to deliver higher definition signals. The limit on the HDTV standard that was approved 20 years ago was you could only have 1080 lines and 16:9 aspect ratio, 30 frames a second. That was it. That was the best you could do. So we know we have a new standard out there now called 4K that has 4 times the information. So we have the ability now with ATSC 3.0 for broadcasters to deliver that really high quality signal, the same thing that you can get right now with Netflix and with some of the other streaming services. The issue is cable companies, satellite companies, others who have to deliver it, if the FCC keeps must-carry in place, are going to have to carry that extra signal through too. So we have a very complicated situation, and the biggest thing is the TV broadcasters also are going to get the ability to have addressable advertising. I'm going to talk more about that in a second, why that's important. But you can see all of the features of ATSC 3.0, but we have to realize it is incompatible with current TV. But since more than 90% of people, used to be 95%, it's actually going down. Since more than 90% of people get their over-the-air TV through their cable provider, through a satellite provider, or another bundler, they don't see all of the behind the scenes. They don't worry about it being incompatible. User awareness, there is none. If you're outside the TV industry, I venture to say you have no awareness. But again, the spectrum repack is the key thing, and the ability for TV broadcasters to make new money is a big thing. And again, we'll get to that in a second. Let's move to the second thing, over-the-top television. That's the industry term. We just call it streaming. We've got a very complicated environment today. You notice I made the Disney Plus logo a little bigger than others, and there are many others that wouldn't fit on. I guess I could have crammed them in there. Had to put CBS All Access on there, by the way, because the Picard series premiered last night. Just curious, has anyone seen it yet in the first 12 hours? Okay. Is anyone planning to see it in the next week? Just 3 of us? Okay. Well, we've got to boldly go, you know. Back to the point, Disney Plus launched in November. This is an effort by Disney with its ABC, and it has its own ESPN that it can fold in and other services. It's going to be followed later this year by HBO Max, which is coming out of Warner Media, a division of Warner Media, division of AT&T, and Peacock, a division of Comcast. So what we have is the 3 big networks, ABC, NBC, NBC, ABC, and CBS, all doing their own streaming thing. This is going to complicate things for consumers. A lot of consumers are choosing, well, I got to have each of these, so they're adding Netflix. They got Netflix already, or they're borrowing Netflix from somebody. I had dinner with my kids the other night, and I just said, okay, just tell me what services they have. Well, I've got Mom's Netflix, and I got Jerry's Hulu, and Interesting way of sharing. It leads to a new opportunity. And I like to do what Larry was talking about yesterday, looking at analogous situations. And the analogous situation I put to understand this is the airlines. If we were to go back before 1997, before the internet, if you wanted to buy an airline ticket, most often you'd go to a travel agent, because the travel agent would have a listing of all the flights and all the fares and all the destinations. And they had the Sabre system, and the Sabre system enabled them to find out what was available. And then the airlines got the ability to sell their tickets online, and they could stop paying that 15% commission to the travel agents and keep that 15% themselves. Because we all know the airlines needed more money. Over time, probably the least profitable industry there has been as an industry. An exception, of course, being 2019 and Delta Airlines, which just announced $1.8 billion in profit sharing to its employees. God, I gotta love Delta. Anyway, so we had the disintermediation. Instead of having the travel agent coming between you and the airline, you contacted the airline directly to buy your tickets. But again, not everybody wanted, when they wanted to take a flight, to go and say, what's the fare on American, what's the fare on Delta, what's the fare on Continental. Hell, I'll throw People Express in there for those who are really like the old. Yeah, we got to have a few old school things here. So a new business emerged, re-intermediation, a new set of middlemen to come between the consumer and the airlines. These were Travelocity and Expedia, Hotwire, companies whose job it was to get the fares from every airline, and most of the airlines participate. Southwest, I think, is the only major airline that doesn't allow others to resell its services. Well, I think we're going to have the same thing happening in television. We've got all of these individual things, but it's going to be easier for the consumer, if they can pay one time and they can get their services. So the question is, are these intermediaries going to be Comcast and Spectrum, or is a new set of intermediaries going to appear? Hint, if you're looking for a business model, you know, if you got to exit and start something up, why not? But that's what's going on in television today. So the big picture, lots and lots of new content flowing out there. More new television content than ever, plus everything old. I can go online and I can watch or I will be able to watch every episode of Law & Order ever produced once Peacock launches. Bum, bum. I wish I had the sound effect. We have to look at this for just a second from an economics perspective, though, because we have just added an incredible inefficiency. Remember, broadcasting is one of the most efficient technologies ever developed. Once you broadcast a signal and get that first viewer, your marginal cost of adding additional viewers is zero. You send that signal out there, everybody gets the same thing at the same time. With streaming, everybody's watching what they want, when they want to. Sometimes we had the picture yesterday of people in the house where 5 people in the living room, everyone looking at a different device. That's 5 different signals being delivered specially. And in the old days of cable, where you had multiple channels, but every house got the same channels at the same time, not a big deal. But in streaming, where you look across a population, let's take Austin, about 3 million people in the metro area. And at any given point, you might have 500,000 different people watching 500,000 different things. That's a lot of bandwidth taken up. So we have to figure out ways not only we're going to do that on the back end, but the final mile. How do we get to the consumer? So that's a challenge. And that's one of the reasons I say having these streaming services means it's the year of the network. Now, let's look at what else is going on in TV. Used to have an even smaller thing in the box. This is the old ATSC would just be a quarter of this. Our current TV is this amount of content. If we go to 4K, it's this amount of content. And if we go to 8K, we're delivering 4 times more. It's not exactly 4 times more information you have to deliver. There are all kinds of ways that you can add information, have interpolation at the receiving end, but it's at least double the amount of bandwidth you have to deliver. So it's not only a case that we are delivering a lot more streams, but there has to be a lot more content if people have the receivers. And we all want to get the best picture we can. How many people have a 4K TV? I laugh at you. I do too. I laugh at you. I laugh at myself. We can't see the difference. Unless you are less than 2 screen heights away from the TV, you can't see the difference. And to see the difference between 4K and 8K, you have to be less than 1 screen height. You have to be right next to it. That's why when you go to buy a television, the salesperson doesn't say, here's a couch 10 feet away, let's see how it looks. It's, let's get up real close. Let's look at that. You can't see those pixels. Nobody watches it that close. Doesn't matter. It gets back to marketing. Best Buy wants people to buy televisions. And unless they can tell you they have something new that's better, and do you know why this weekend is significant for TV? Super Bowl, yeah. This weekend is the highest television sales weekend of the year. Because anybody who's going to have people over to the Super Bowl, we got to provide the best picture possible. Well, for all practical purposes, a standard HD picture is going to look just as good as a 4K picture. But that doesn't mean we don't have the marketing ability, and we don't have the ability to use this in other ways. Let's be practical. 8K is a very robust display technology. There are places where you do have to get that close, and you do want to have that resolution. So it'll be used in digital signage. It'll be used in TV production. When you're shooting, instead of trying to zoom in and get me moving around, you could just have a wide shot. And then in post-production, you could decide what part you want to see. It's incredible opportunities. But in order to do the production, in order to do the transmission, you got to have the bandwidth. And let's not forget frame rate. We are still stuck with most television systems with 30 frames a second, where we can still have some artifacts. We still see things moving or strobing. 60 frames a second is more realistic. 120 is even better. You get to 240, it's too much. You can't even see it. Gamers like this. Gamers want that fast reaction. They want the smooth motion. But there's also something called the uncanny valley, where if you get a signal that's too realistic, then people start to feel unsettled. So there's psychological issues we get there. Again, frame rates will increase. Oh, and that requires more signal, more bandwidth. So again, we need a network. All right, this takes us to addressable advertising. The 20th century gave us mass advertising, where we're sitting down to watch TV, and I will get to see a commercial for Revlon, followed by a commercial perhaps for Folgers or Starbucks, followed by maybe a commercial for an Apple product. Complete waste. I don't wear makeup, I don't drink coffee, and I don't own anything made by Apple. So they've wasted all that time. Wouldn't it be more efficient if, as you're watching, whatever you're watching, the commercial you see is related to something you want? You know, if they gave me a commercial for Buffalo Trace bourbon, I would pay attention to that. I'm a bourbon collector. I love my bourbon. If they gave me a commercial for electric cars or solar panels on the roof, I'd pay attention. Or Lipitor. We all have things that interest us. Well, the point is, the industry is emerging with a set of standards for addressable advertising. And I'll pick on Brenda in a second. Do you know the top company that's doing addressable advertising? Okay. Pick up your card. The most aggressive company in exploiting next-generation advertising and targeting has been Turner Broadcasting. Turner's team, when they became a part of Time Warner, later now Warner Media, those resources are now being leveraged by the people inside AT&T to take a next-generation approach. AT&T, in my opinion, today is way ahead of the market in the technology that's delivering this. And this is important because as we look at revenue growth opportunities, we all know what the ARPUs have been and what the trajectory has been. Well, if you give a new source of revenue for a company that big and a way to leverage the network in a new way, and addressable advertising is the key one. Because not only do we give viewers ads that are more relevant, which makes the advertising more efficient, it also gives the ability, perhaps, to deliver fewer advertisements. Now, I don't know whether the networks are going to go that far or whether they just want to keep piling on relevant ads, but there is a great opportunity out there to increase the revenue and increase the efficiency. There are also some severe social issues that have to be faced. What happens when certain audiences are deemed not to be valuable and nothing is delivered to them because of that? So we have to realize this is a two-edged sword. Now, with more time, we could get into the social implications. I just want to crack give you a peek inside this room, though. This is coming. The idea that everyone gets the same ad is 20th century. 21st century is you get an ad that's relevant to you, and that's good for business. Let's switch to audio technologies. Huge announcement last week, double-barreled. iHeartMedia, the second largest owner and operator of radio stations in the US, announced that it is employing AI technologies to program its stations. and then laid off a substantial portion of its staff because it didn't need the DJs anymore. Now, I'm an old-time radio guy. I got my start DJing, can you tell? I think live and local is the best way to do radio, but I got to watch this. This is only last week that this happened, but this change that they're making has the potential to revolutionize radio and make it more implications for the network and what's going to be delivered. Can we have addressable advertising in audio? Sure. We have bandwidth. We have ability to deliver extra signals. Right now, the HD, you are all getting, whether you're listening, anybody actively ever listen to HD radio? Okay. About once a month I tune across. There is a new service for terrestrial broadcasts that allows terrestrial FM stations to deliver 3 more stations on top of their regular station in the same bandwidth. Or instead of delivering additional stations, they could deliver extra commercials, so everyone gets a customized commercial. We're not there yet, but audio is changing. And this is all going to be complicated on the organizational level. There keep being rumors that Liberty Media is kicking the tires on having its SiriusXM group acquire iHeartMedia, and they already own Pandora and SiriusXM. So we know people are using audio extensively. We know Spotify, Pandora, when it comes to listeners under the age of 30. Almost everyone has a subscription. You know, those of us over 30, it's more likely we have SiriusXM or we have the Amazon or Google Music subscriptions. But we all enjoy our audio. Technology to watch. Not as big a use of bandwidth, but it's there. All right, video games. Huge, huge user of bandwidth here. What we have is video games are now crossing over with virtual reality. The goal of a video game programmer has always been to create as realistic an experience as possible, and there's very little that's more realistic than putting on an HMD and going into another space. Now, there are issues with that, but video games are heading another direction too with esports, where rather than becoming a game you play, it becomes a sport you watch. And you have contests with prizes in the millions of dollars for esports, and esports arenas popping up. So something that 2 years ago was barely on the radar is becoming more and more mainstream, to the point that universities are looking into, do they need to add esports to their athletic programs?
Some of them are getting scholarships too.
Yeah. Let's do it. Let's do any way we can help pay for education. Yeah. You know, I love it. We have 600 student athletes at the University of South Carolina. And what I love to tell everybody, the average grade point average of our student athletes is higher than our regular student body. And that's not because our students are dumb. We raised our admission standards and applications went up, so we've got really, really bright students, but our student athletes are incredible. We have a few teams with the average grade point average is like a 3.5, 3.6. So anyway, point is, esports, growing, something you need to have on your radar because, again, this is where the culture is going. This is where the money is going to be flowing. All right, but there's another place the money is going to be flowing later this year. Both Sony and Microsoft are introducing new versions of their consoles. So we're going to get a PS5 to replace the PS4 and a new version of the Xbox. Anybody know what it's called? Probably Xbox Prime. Just X. Yeah, Xbox. God, they are so creative. The games do so much, and you know the marketing people, well, just throw it out there. People will buy it, and it will. These are going to be the 2 hottest items come fall. The thing to watch for is when the things go on sale. There'll be people camped up out in front of the store at midnight to buy them. Obviously, we have new titles being introduced all the time. Again, one of the most brilliant things ever done was when they started John Madden Football. And they didn't make it John Madden Football, it was John Madden 1994, or whatever the year was. Because that meant the next year they could have Madden 95, and then Madden 96. People had to replace it every year. Point is, with video games, you want people not only to want the software, you want to continually provide updates. Who's been, I talked about that. Oh, yeah, one other point on the consoles, cloud-based architecture. Used to be you bought a game, you got a DVD or a Blu-ray, you popped it in, it had all the instructions. Now all the power is going to be in the cloud. Console has to be dumber, but guess what we need? More network. If I can only get Christopher Walken in here. More network. Instead of more cowbell? No? All right. So let's talk about Fortnite. Anybody here ever seen a teenager just buried in Fortnite? That teenager and their comrades generated last year $1.8 billion, which is down from the $2.4 billion they generated the year before. And Fortnite last year went down for a whole day to tease the fact that they were coming up with new environments. And not being there for a day created extra interest, so they had a lot more attention the day after. This is an industry, if you are not watching it closely, you really want to be following it because it's big. Estimated global revenues, $120 billion from video games last year. Let's take a quick look, comparison. Everybody looks every week. How's the box office doing? This is the movie box office. $11.4 billion last year. Video games and VR, almost 10 times that amount. No, more than 10 times. Got to work on my math. $120 billion. But all advertising combined, this is global, approximately $560 billion. So again, I love with my students to give these perspectives so we can see how one thing fits in. And then we look at telecommunications. This is telephony, this is networking, all combined $1.4 trillion. So we have to, these others feed in, but we can't be distracted. You see a lot more news about the latest movie titles released, but from an economic standpoint. And I've got one more number I'm going to add a little later in the presentation. Okay, let's move to VR. We have this global term called virtual environments that incorporates virtual reality, augmented reality, and 360 video. VR, you put on the headset, you go into another space, and you have the ability to navigate that space and do things. Whether it's games, whether it's visiting a place you've never visited before, whether it's being trained. Here's the thing. Games are a limited application. And the reason they're limited is because of the physiological effects of being inside. But VR is being used just as importantly for training. Give you an example. We're doing a conference at the University of South Carolina, March 8th through 10th on virtual teaching. The whole goal is to look at how VR is being used to teach in the higher education. And got an email day before yesterday from a company that has software called Virtual Body, where if I'm trying to teach anatomy, I put on the HMD and I can go into a body. I don't have to worry about dissecting. I can look at what the structure is. I can be in, they have a part, you shrink yourself down, can go inside a heart, and you can look around and see what's going on. You can navigate it. The studies that have been done so far show that the people who learn anatomy with VR learn much more quickly and have much greater retention for what they're learning. And it really, this is an actual quote from a faculty member earlier this week. It reduces the need to find the dead cats. because the basic biology, you got to dissect something. And you have the cats and the fetal pigs, and he said, just imagine how the building's going to smell differently if we don't have all that formaldehyde. He's a big fan of this, and the software works. So it's not just biology, but I give you that as an example. Think in business applications, in architecture. Anytime you put buildings are all built using CAD anyway. So you can put on the HMD and you can walk around the building. You can see if there are any bad angles. You know, I think of that first apartment I had in college where you open the front door and there's the bathroom, you know? The next versions of it, after they had built 100 that way, they put the door over here so you walked into the living room and the bathroom was over there. A little change that little VR could have shown. Again, architecture is making extensive use of VR. The Defense Department is using it in training, and it can be used extensively in research, especially in data modeling. We have limitations. Health issue is a big one. First and foremost, you put on HMD, you're disconnected from the world, you can trip over things. You can fall down, and a lot of this happens. I have a first generation Virtual Boy that Nintendo made about 25 years ago. The instruction manual, 50% of it is just warnings. And it had software built in that would shut off after 15 minutes. Because if it didn't, you would stay in there and it was too heavy to actually wear at that point. You had to sit it on a table and you would get your neck aches and other kinds of sores from bending over. There are other health issues. We found in using it in education that when people put on an HMD, about 10% of the population can't handle it. They get dizzy, they get uncomfortable, they physically get nauseated. And that's, it's not a thing that everyone can use. There's also issues with accessibility. One of the requirements we have in any university is to make any content we have accessible to anyone who wants to view it. Well, if you're creating virtual reality, how do you make VR accessible to someone who's visually impaired? It has to be done. So these are barriers that have to be overcome. The biggest thing is to realize VR is usually limited to a 5 to 10 minute experience. With that, you usually don't have too many physiological problems. But we're not talking about taking your favorite Star Wars episode or even a Law and Order episode. Too long for VR. VR is built for shorter things. And good VR takes a lot of bandwidth. Augmented reality, separate from VR. We saw some examples yesterday with the glasses. The idea that either holding a device up, you can have an overlay of content on top of it, or putting on glasses, you can have things projected on glasses. You know, I look forward to the day when I can walk into a classroom and I don't want to see all the tweets from my students. I just want to see their names. You know, a trick that would let me, I mean, I'm looking, Vincent's got his name tag in front. Rosella, you got your name card. Okay, that's a help. Think of the money we'd save if I had the glasses and that information would just pop up. Okay, it's a fanciful thing. So far, the greatest use of augmented reality has been Pokemon Go. It's a successful diversion technology. It doesn't have the same time limitations. And it has great potential for issues like translation. And it uses comparatively little bandwidth, but it still uses bandwidth. Next is 360 video. A lot of people call this virtual reality. It's not. Taking a camera that can shoot 360 and then having it navigate an area or having a person put it on, being able to watch. It's a fun experience. It's very useful. We use it for athletic events. We use it for musical performances. We're experimenting with it for dance. It's just an enhancement we have to regular video. It's not appropriate for all video. I think about, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, in this same room, we had a 360 camera live streaming the whole thing. But who would actually want to put on an HMD and look at the back of the room when you could be looking at me? Well, maybe everybody. But most video, you want to have a director that decides what should be seen and you're focusing attention. But certain experiences, 360 is very useful. Oh, and when you do it, it requires a lot more bandwidth. All right, let's jump to another technology completely. The Internet of Things. This was discussed a lot yesterday. I don't have to give you details on this. I want to give you some just fragments that might help illustrate what's going on. The first is we have to realize that when we're talking about any Internet of Things, we've got to realize that there is data flowing, and we have to have a network behind it and some processing. The question is, where does all this take place? It's possible to take a device that has intelligence built in, and it doesn't need much connection. And not really, it's a smart device, but not necessarily a connected device. But once you say, now we're going to have the processing elsewhere, we can put the processing on the edge, so it's central but close, or we can put it somewhere in the cloud. Either one requires much more network capacity, much quicker communication depending upon what you're trying to do. You want to minimize the latency. We are just beginning to scratch the surface of what we can do with a digital assistant in the house. I want to take you back 100 years ago when electric wires were being strung to households. What's the first thing we put in a house with an electric wire? What was it? A lamp. Yeah, we wanted light. We didn't use it for heat because we had coal for heat or oil. We didn't use it for refrigeration because there was no such thing as a refrigerator at that point. But once the electricity was there, the question is now what can we use it for? And we had refrigeration. We had electric stoves. We had radio and later television. Well, now we're at the same place with these personal assistants. Once you have an interface that can hear a voice, what can we do with something that can understand a voice and process information? We're using it for thermostats. We can turn on light bulbs. These are baby applications. Let's think big. How do we use it for education? How do we use it for romance? How do we use it to build wealth? Having that intelligence in the home gives a great deal of capability, and we need another generation of applications. So that's coming. All right. What we have now is the smart house. This is a great illustration that Helen Mary did that we put in the ComTech update that shows everything from your robot cleaner, the energy console, your electric vehicle, more and more applications, and they all need to be connected. They all need bandwidth. We know, we've seen these devices. There will be another generation coming very soon. Right now, the commands you can give are rudimentary. You can't give conditional commands. You can't say, at 5 o'clock, turn on the oven unless I'm not home, and then wait till 6:30. Alexa can't handle that. But Alexa can handle turn on the oven. So programming is going to go a few more steps, and then we'll see more applications. The adoption continues to increase. This is just a 1-year period. So you can see huge, and it continues to go up. I don't have 2019 numbers yet, and we can see that Amazon is dominating the field right now, although in the early stages, any new entrant can come in and disrupt the market. One of the things that's going to be most connected to these devices are health devices. I'm a big fan of these. I've got my Fitbit on. Someone said, why do you wear 2 watches? It's not a watch, it's Fitbit. Because it tells me how many steps I made, it tells me how I slept. Oh, and I have my CPAP machine, which also tells me how I slept. Oh, and I have Diane got me for Christmas, little cardia device. It's pictured right here. It's the size of a USB stick. I can put 2 fingers on it, and if I sit it on my leg, it can do a full 6-lead EKG, medical quality. What's the point? We have the ability with intelligent devices and networks to really take the next step in diagnosis in monitoring and in preventive care. Now, keep in mind there are going to be 3 distinct markets for this. One market is going to be the people who need treatment, and it's cheaper to have the monitoring at home than to keep them in a hospital. Second market are people who want to be healthier. So they want to monitor their, whether it's their blood sugar, the number of steps they take. They want to know how they're doing. Third are the hypochondriacs. I need to know what's going on. There's a market here. All right. The detail at the bottom, I told you on that graph a minute ago, the highest leg on the graph of spending was telecommunications at 1.4 trillion. Global spending on health is more than $10 trillion. If we can use these devices in order to improve health, then we can have a much more efficient healthcare delivery system. But in order for that to happen, we've got to have a network. Network. The answer, no matter what the question is, the answer is network, at least today. All right, a few other trends we got to look at. Automotive telematics, what's going on? I love this. One of my co-authors gave me this picture from CES of the Fisker Ocean electric vehicle. Really cool vehicle, and like the Tesla, has autonomous capabilities. And everybody's talking about self-driving cars, and they're coming. Self-driving trucks will be first. But the biggest thing is the assistive technologies. The assistive technologies are here right now. The idea that your car can actually, if it sees something in front of you, can stop if you're not paying attention. Or if you're driving and you're drifting, it can pull you back into your lane. It's another level of cruise control. You can control how much feedback it provides. These are little things, but what's bigger is vehicle-to-vehicle communication. 3 car ahead slams on its brakes. With vehicle-to-vehicle communication, my car can know that and automatically slow down much more quickly than I can respond. University of Michigan's been experimenting with that technology. Oh, and what happens when we get every car on the network with information going back up to a traffic center so they can look at what the flows are and can control traffic lights and interchanges, relaying information back to vehicles. That's the big promise of automotive telematics. The self-driving car, it's a sexy thing. The practical thing that's happening today is in the assistive and the vehicle-to-vehicle communication. And guess what these need? They all need more network. We'll get there. If we do get self-driving cars, commuting time becomes media time. So we have to have even more network, because somebody will want to watch CNN or Law and Order or Stephen Colbert or Sean Hannity or whatever they like to watch in their car. Blockchain. Having a technology that not only enables cryptocurrency, but enables security for any type of information and long-term protection, this is a dream come true for many people, nightmare for others. The issue is, in order for blockchain to work, you have to have network. AI, I don't know what AI is going to do. I'm still listening. I'm learning everything I can. I have nothing to offer you except question mark is smaller than last year. We know AI is going to have an impact, and we know whatever AI does, it's going to require inputs, and it's going to have feedback, and it's going to require network. Regulatory issues, these are going to be covered a little bit later, so I'm going to just jump past them. Social media, we've reached a tipping point. I identified this last year. I think it's becoming increasingly severe, especially issues of privacy and authenticity of information. We know there is a decline in use coming in social media. So let's sum it up. Almost every development I've talked about requires some form of bandwidth increase. And the challenge is, are we going to become too dependent on the network? If we all have this one resource that controls everything we do, what happens if it's not there? I don't mean to scare anyone, but cybersecurity is one of the biggest challenges that we have. We know, who was I watching? No, it was here yesterday. Was watching live in this room the discussion of how many attacks are happening from Iran, from North Korea, from Russia, from China, on every network at all times. One of the dangers of self-driving cars is somebody hacking the self-driving car and forcing it to do something it shouldn't do. I mean, the amount of safety you have to build in, not just to keep the car on the road, but to keep a bad actor from doing something bad with access. And this goes across every technology we've talked about, from the health technologies to the video technologies. So, what should you watch? I said it's the year of the network. 5G, we obviously are going to all be watching that. Internet of Things is going to become bigger. Look for more and more control, more intelligence in the network. Streaming video, again, we want to look at the patterns of adoption. Cyber warfare, this is an important constraint, and it's got to be a component of everything we do. And finally, privacy. So, I have exhausted my time. We've got, I wanted to end a little more quickly. We've got a minute for questions or comments. So there are lots of technologies I haven't talked about, so if there's something you wanted me to comment on that I didn't bring up, this is your time.
Another thing for you all, especially as you're looking at the 3 bands and all, is a thing called Web 3.0. And just to tie to one of his comments about social networking's at a crossroad, our social networks, they just may wash around one of those networks, never hit the broadband, the backbone.
Well, other thoughts? Questions?
How do people get the book?
Oh, yeah, I haven't talked about the book. Okay. Sorry. Forgot to do the Vanna White. This is the book that we publish every 2 years. It's called Communication Technology Update and Fundamentals. Used to be just the update, and we realized it was being used as a basic textbook, so we added chapters on history, media structure, regulation. But we've got separate sections in the book on electronic mass media, computers, consumer electronics, networking, and telephony. And within each section, individual chapters. So about 25 chapters in each edition. This is the book that we distributed in summer of 2018. It's the one on the market now. We are currently preparing the 17th edition, which will be out. The chapters are coming in now, and it will be in the bookstores July 1st. So for copies of either one, the easiest thing is just to go to Amazon.com. It's not an expensive book. You think textbook, that's got to be $200. No, today only. $59, but they usually have it on sale for $43 or something. And there are lots of used copies out there because it's adopted as a textbook. So, yes, yep. It's three formats. You get electronic, paper copy, or hardcover. And the hardcovers for libraries, that one is $160 because it costs so much to. It's the book industry. They're looking for margins. But yes, and if you have any questions about any technology, my contact information is with the conference information, or just email me. I'm the only Augie at the University of South Carolina that I know of. I'm happy to answer questions at any time. This is what I do this for love. This is a lot of fun for me because it's like a spectator sport. Except as opposed to the Super Bowl, everyone can win. You know, a week from Sunday, it's going to be either Kansas City or San Francisco. But 2 years from now, it could be AT&T and Comcast both winning. So, I don't know about T-Mobile. Yeah.
One other question for you.
Yes, sir.
And that is the streaming wars. Right.
Yes.
Everybody wants to win, but to me it just seems like it's going to be a bloodbath for a while. Any predictions on how long this bloodbath will be out there till we have some winners or losers or reaggregation, or is it just going to be a permanent shift?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a bloodbath, because when you're telling a consumer $15 a month for HBO Max, or for Peacock $5 a month, or $10 without advertising, that in relative terms is such a small amount. You know, I'm trying to look at where to reallocate my newspaper subscription. It's gone up from $20 a month to $30 to $40. When it hit $65, I contacted the publisher and said, this is ridiculous. $2 a day for something. So I got a lower rate, but most people have 3 or 4, but I think the answer is going to be new aggregators will come in and say, we're going to have the Steve package. You pick what you want, we're going to bill you one time a month, and it's going to be exactly what you want. So I don't see any kind of bloodbath. I may see some acquisitions. Even though CBS and Viacom have merged back, they had CBS All Access and Pluto TV, they're still relatively small compared to what Disney can offer and what Comcast can offer through Peacock. Having said that, they've got the Star Trek properties and have done really well using those as their leaders. So I expect if anyone's going to be acquired, it will be them. And there's such a great fit if you get CBS News and CNN together. So that makes AT&T a logical suitor. But that's speculation. But I don't think they're going to disappear. There's too much demand. Keep in mind, average television use is going up. We thought when the internet came out that the amount people would watch TV has gone down. If we go back 25 years, it was 3 hours and 20 minutes a day on average. We're now above 4 hours a day on average for adults, and we're getting close to 5. People who aren't watching TV, interestingly, are teenagers. So. Yeah, and they watch it in little short clips. What we think of as traditional channels is very rarely viewed. So, all right, thank you very much.